My daughter-in-law Jessica stood in my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon in late September, looked me directly in the eye with that perfect smile of hers, and said, "You know what, Diane? You're just a bald, pathetic old woman trying to stay relevant and, honestly, it's embarrassing watching you try so hard. Maybe it's time you just accepted reality and stopped pretending you're something you're not." She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather, like those words weren't carefully chosen. Weapons designed to cut me in the most vulnerable place possible, like she hadn't just insulted the one thing I'd been most self-conscious about since my chemotherapy ended 5 years ago. My hair, or rather, the lack of it, because after 6 brutal rounds of chemotherapy for stage 3 breast cancer, my hair never fully grew back. It came in patchy and thin with bald spots that no amount of styling could hide. And eventually, after months of trying every hair growth treatment, every vitamin, every prayer, I just gave up and started wearing wigs. Beautiful, realistic wigs that cost me a small fortune, but made me feel like myself again, made me feel human, made me feel like the cancer hadn't won, hadn't taken everything from me. But Jessica knew how sensitive I was about it. She knew, because I'd told her once in a moment of weakness and vulnerability when we were planning her wedding, and she'd asked me why I always wore wigs. And I'd opened up to her, told her about the cancer, about the fear about watching my hair fall out in clumps in the shower, about the grief of losing a part of my identity, and she'd seemed sympathetic at the time, had hugged me, had told me I was so brave, had said all the right things, but apparently she'd just been storing that information away, saving it for the perfect moment to use it as a weapon, and that moment had finally come. And that's when I decided, right there in my kitchen, with her cruel words still hanging in the air, that sometimes karma needs a little help. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled, because this is a story about revenge, yes, but it's also a story about standing up for yourself, about setting boundaries, about refusing to be someone's emotional punching bag anymore, and about the consequences that come when you push someone too far. My name is Diane Foster. I'm 57 years old. I've been a widow for 8 years since my husband David died of a heart attack, and until about 6 months ago, I thought I had a decent relationship with my daughter-in-law, Jessica Monroe Foster, who'd been married to my oldest son, Brandon, for 3 years. They met at the law firm where Brandon worked as a corporate attorney. Jessica was a paralegal. They're young, ambitious, beautiful, confident, everything Brandon said he wanted in a partner when they started dating. I was thrilled because Brandon had been single for so long, had been so focused on his career, that I'd worried he'd never find someone. And then Jessica came along, and he was happy. He was lighter, he smiled more, and when he told me he was going to propose, I cried tears of joy, because my baby was going to have the life I wanted for him, a partner, someone to build a future, with someone to love. When Brandon brought Jessica to meet me for the first time, about 4 years ago, I tried so hard to make a good impression. I cleaned my house for 2 days straight, cooked Brandon's favorite meal, bought fresh flowers, put out my good china. I wanted her to like me, wanted her to see that. Even though I was just a retired school teacher, living in a modest house on the west side of Detroit, I was warm and welcoming and excited to have her in our family. Jessica was stunning. I remember thinking that the moment she walked through my door, she had this long, thick, honey blonde hair that fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, green eyes, a figure that looked like she lived at the gym, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance she was wearing. Expensive clothes, designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, shoes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. And when she shook my hand, her grip was firm. Her smile was perfect, but something in her eyes was cold, assessing, judging. She looked around my living room, and I saw her take in the worn furniture, the family photos. On every surface, the tchotchkes I'd collected over the years, the slightly outdated decor, and I saw something flicker across her face. Disappointment maybe, or disdain. It was gone in a second, replaced by that perfect smile. But I'd seen it, and it made my stomach drop, made me suddenly self-conscious about my home, about myself, about whether I was good enough to be this polished woman's mother-in-law, but I pushed those feelings aside, told myself I was being paranoid, told myself that Jessica was just nervous about meeting Brandon's family, that first impressions are always awkward, that once we got to know each other, everything would be fine. And for a while, it seemed like I was right. Jessica was polite during that first dinner. She complimented my cooking, asked me questions about my life, about Brandon's childhood, seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and I relaxed. I thought, okay, this is going to work out. She's lovely, she's perfect for Brandon. We're going to have a wonderful relationship. I was so naive looking back. I can see all the signs I missed the way she'd compliment my cooking, but then mention an article she'd read about sodium content, the way she'd ask about my hobbies, but somehow make them sound small and unimportant, the way she'd compare me to her own mother, constantly. Her mother, who was apparently perfect in every way, younger looking, more active, more cultured, more successful, more everything. But at the time, I didn't see it. I was too busy being grateful that she was making an effort, being relieved that Brandon had found someone, being hopeful about having a daughter. Because I'd only had sons, and I'd always wanted a daughter, someone to shop with, to talk to share things with, and I thought Jessica could be that person. How wrong I was. The problems really started after the wedding, which was this elaborate affair that cost Brandon a fortune. I helped where I could, contributed what I could afford. Threw Jessica a beautiful bridal shower at my house, invited all her friends and family, made sure everything was perfect because I wanted her to feel loved and welcomed and supported, but nothing I did was ever quite right. The invitations for the shower weren't fancy enough. The food was too heavy. The decorations were too traditional. Jessica never said anything directly, never complained to my face, but I'd overhear her on the phone with her mother talking about how Brandon's family was sweet, but kind of low class, how they didn't really understand style, how she was going to have to manage expectations, and every word was like a little knife cutting away at my confidence, at my sense of belonging in my own son's life. But I didn't say anything. Didn't want to cause problems, didn't want to be that mother-in-law, the difficult one, the one who can't get along with her son's wife. So I smiled and nodded and took it all in stride and convinced myself that once they were married, once Jessica felt more secure in the family, things would get better, but they didn't. They got worse, so much worse after the wedding. Jessica seemed to feel like she had permission to stop pretending to be nice. She started making comments about everything, about my weight, about my clothes, about my house, about my cooking, about my life choices. Nothing was ever direct enough that I could call her out on it. Nothing was ever cruel enough that anyone else would see it as a problem. But the comments added up, became a constant drip of criticism that wore away at my self-esteem, made me question everything about myself. And my hair, my wigs became her favorite target. She started making comments, maybe 6 months after the wedding, little remarks that seemed innocent enough. "Don't you get hot in that wig, Diane," or "I read an article about how wigs can damage your remaining hair. Have you thought about just going natural?" or "my favorite. Do you really think anyone is fooled by those wigs? They're obviously fake." Each comment was delivered with a smile, with concern, with the pretense that she was trying to help. But I knew better. I could see the malice in her eyes, could hear the satisfaction in her voice when she saw me flinch, could tell she was enjoying my discomfort, and I didn't know what to do about it. Because what could I say? How could I explain that her seemingly innocent questions were actually cruel attacks on my deepest insecurity? I tried talking to Brandon about it once, about 3 months after the wedding. I called him up, asked if we could have lunch, just the two of us, and when we met, I very carefully tried to explain that Jessica's comments were hurting me, that she seemed to focus a lot on my appearance, that I felt like she was judging me constantly. And Brandon, my sweet, well-meaning son, looked genuinely confused. He said, "Mom, I think you're being too sensitive. Jessica adores you. She's always telling me how lucky we are to have you in our lives. She's just trying to help. You know, she works in beauty. She knows about these things. Maybe you should take her advice. Maybe she's right, that it's time to just embrace your natural look." And that's when I realized Brandon couldn't see. It couldn't or wouldn't see that his wife was being cruel, because to him Jessica was perfect, and I was his mother, who he loved, but who he also saw as maybe a little outdated, a little overly sensitive, a little stuck in her ways. So I dropped it, never brought it up again because I knew there was no point. Knew that if I pushed harder, I'd just drive a wedge between us, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing my son, couldn't bear the thought of him having to choose between his wife and his mother. So I stayed quiet. I took the abuse. I smiled through the comments, and I died a little inside every single Sunday when they came for dinner. Let me tell you about those Sunday dinners, because they became a special kind of torture for me. Sunday dinner was a tradition in our family, something I'd started when the boys were little every Sunday. At 6 o'clock, we'd all sit down together, have a home-cooked meal talk about our week, connect as a family. Even after David died, even after the boys grew up and moved out, we kept the tradition going. Brandon and his wife and my younger son Marcus and his wife Tanya would come over, and we'd spend the evening together. And it was my favorite time of the week, the one time I got to have both my boys under my roof, got to feel like we were still a unit, still a family. But once Jessica joined the family, those Sunday dinners became something I dreaded, became a weekly reminder of how much she disliked me, how much she judged me, how much she enjoyed making me feel small. She'd arrive at my house and immediately start commenting on things: that oven is so old, Diane. When are you going to upgrade? Or are you really serving fried chicken? Don't you know how unhealthy that is? Or this house is so dark. Have you thought about painting the walls something lighter? Or my personal favorite, your wig looks different today. Did you get a new one? It's very obvious. It's a wig. Maybe you should invest in a more natural-looking one. The comments were constant, relentless, designed to chip away at my confidence, and they worked. I started second-guessing everything I cooked, dreading what Jessica would say about it. I started cleaning my house obsessively, worrying that she'd find something to criticize. I started spending money I didn't really have on more expensive wigs, hoping that maybe if they looked better she'd stop commenting, but nothing was ever good enough for Jessica. She always found something to pick, at something to judge, something to make me feel like I was failing at being a hostess, at being a mother-in-law, at being a person. And my son Brandon never said a word. Never defended me, never told his wife to back off, never acknowledged that her behavior was inappropriate. He'd just sit there at my table eating my food, looking uncomfortable occasionally, shooting me these apologetic looks that said, I know she's out of line. But what can you do? She's my wife and I have to keep her happy. And that hurt almost more than Jessica's comments. The fact that my own son would sit there and watch someone treat his mother with such blatant disrespect and do nothing about it. But I understood it too. Understood that he was caught in the middle. Understood that standing up to Jessica would cause problems in his marriage. Understood that he was choosing the path of least resistance, even if it meant sacrificing my feelings in the process. So I forgave him, made excuses for him, told myself he was just trying to keep the peace, told myself it wasn't his fault that Jessica was like this, told myself that eventually things would get better, that Jessica would mature, that she'd realize she was being cruel and she'd change. But 3 years went by and nothing changed. Jessica only got worse, only got bolder, only got more creative in her cruelty. And I kept taking it, kept absorbing the abuse, kept playing the role of the understanding mother-in-law who never complained, never caused problems, never rocked the boat, because I was terrified of the alternative, was terrified of being cut out of Brandon's life, of becoming that mother-in-law. That sons avoid that. Families don't invite to things that ends up alone, because she couldn't get along with her daughter-in-law. So I took it all, the comments about my weight, how I really didn't need that second helping of mac and cheese, did I? The comments about my age, how I was almost 60, and maybe it was time to start dressing age appropriately. The comments about my house, how it was so cluttered, how she could never live with so much stuff everywhere. The comments about my job, how being a retired school teacher was nice but not really prestigious. The comments about my late husband, how it was probably for the best that he died before he got old and sick. The comments about my financial situation, how I clearly didn't have much money. which was fine. Some people are just meant to be working class. And through it all, I smiled, I nodded, I changed the subject. I pretended everything was fine, because that's what you do, right? That's what good mothers do. We absorb the pain, we take the hits, we sacrifice our own dignity, our own self-respect, our own mental health to maintain family harmony, to keep our children close, to avoid being alone. But then came that Sunday in late September, the Sunday that changed everything. The Sunday that finally pushed me past my breaking point. We were having our usual family dinner. I'd made fried chicken and mac and cheese and collard greens and cornbread. All Brandon's favorite foods. All the foods Jessica constantly criticized as unhealthy and fattening. But that I made anyway, because they were my son's favorites. And this was my house, my table, my tradition. And if she didn't like it, she could eat somewhere else. Jessica arrived that day in what I can only describe as a foul mood from the moment. She walked through my door. She was making comments about everything. The smell in my house was too strong. Apparently I used too much seasoning. The temperature was too warm. Didn't I know that keeping your house above 70 degrees was wasteful? And bad for the environment. My outfit was all wrong. That dress was very bright. Diane, are you sure you should be wearing such bold colors at your age? And my wig. Oh, she had a lot to say about my wig that day. That's a new one, isn't it? She said as soon as she saw me. It's very puffy, very wiggy. You can really tell it's not real hair. Diane, maybe you should ask for a refund. I swallowed the hurt, forced a smile and said, I like it, Jessica. It makes me feel pretty. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, well, I guess that's what matters. That you feel pretty, even if everyone else can see it's clearly fake. Clearly a wig. Clearly you trying too hard to hide what you really are, which is a cancer patient who lost her hair. I felt like I'd been slapped, felt tears prick at my eyes, but I blinked them back, refused to let her see how much she'd hurt me. Brandon, who'd witnessed the entire exchange, said nothing, just looked at his plate, looked uncomfortable, looked anywhere but at me, and that might have hurt worse than Jessica's comment. The fact that my son would let someone talk to his mother like that, would sit there in silence while his wife verbally abused the woman who'd given birth to him, who'd raised him, who'd sacrificed everything for him. Dinner was tense. Everyone could feel it. Marcus, my younger son, kept shooting me. Concerned looks kept trying to start conversations to ease the tension. His wife, Tanya, who'd always been sweet to me, kept complimenting my cooking, kept trying to make me smile, but I couldn't. I sat there at the head of my own table, in my own home, feeling small and worthless and ridiculous. And after we ate, Jessica made a big show of helping me clean up. Insisted on coming into the kitchen with me to do the dishes, even though I told her I'd handle it. And that's when it happened. That's when she crossed the line that could never be uncrossed. We were standing at my sink washing dishes in silence, and I thought, maybe, just maybe we could get through this evening without any more drama. But then Jessica turned to me, wiped her hands on a dish towel and said, Diane, I've been meaning to talk to you about something important, and I need you to really hear me. Okay. My stomach dropped, because I knew from her tone that whatever was coming wouldn't be good. But I nodded, said, okay, Jessica, what is it? And she took a deep breath like she was preparing to say something difficult, something brave, something that needed to be said, and she looked me right in the eyes and said, it's about your wigs, about this whole act you've been putting on for years, and I just think at a certain point, you need to accept reality. You need to accept that you're not young anymore, you're not attractive anymore, you're not who you used to be before the cancer. And honestly, watching you try so hard with these wigs and the makeup and the clothes that are too young for you and everything. It's kind of sad, Diane. It's pathetic, really. You're just this bald old woman trying desperately to stay relevant, trying to pretend you're still desirable, still valuable, still worth looking at. And it's embarrassing for everyone, especially for Brandon, having to explain to his colleagues and friends why his mother looks like she's wearing a costume all the time, why she can't just accept aging gracefully, the way normal women do. The words hit me like physical blows. each one landing in a soft, vulnerable place I'd been protecting for years. I felt my face get hot, felt my hands start shaking, felt something inside me crack wide open. This wasn't just another little dig, another small cruelty. This was Jessica, deliberately, maliciously going for my throat, going for the one thing she knew would destroy me, and she was doing it with a smile on her face, doing it in my own kitchen, in my own home, after eating my food, sitting at my table, being part of my family for 3 years, and something in me just snapped, something that had been bending under the weight of her abuse for all these years finally broke. And instead of crying, instead of shrinking away, instead of absorbing this attack like I'd absorbed all the others, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Felt anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, calculating, dangerous kind. And I very carefully set down the plate I'd been washing, looked at. Jessica really looked at her, at this beautiful 29-year-old woman with her perfect skin and her perfect body and her perfect life who had everything. Everything I'd lost to cancer and to age and to grief, and I smiled, and I said very calmly, "I'm sorry you feel that way, Jessica, but these wigs make me feel like myself again. After cancer took my hair, and if that makes you uncomfortable, if that threatens you somehow, that's something you'll need to work through. Not me. I'm done apologizing for surviving. I'm done making myself smaller to make you more comfortable." Jessica's eyes widened. She clearly hadn't expected me to push back, hadn't expected anything other than my usual passive acceptance of her cruelty. "I didn't mean it like that," she said, backtracking, now that she'd realized her attack hadn't landed the way she'd intended. "I just think you should embrace your natural look. Be confident in who you are now, instead of hiding behind these wigs." The condescension in her voice was palpable, and it made me want to scream, but I didn't. I just smiled that same cold smile and said, "Thank you for your concern, Jessica. I'll take it under advisement." And I turned back to the dishes, and I finished washing them, and I didn't say another word. And Jessica stood there for a moment, clearly unsure what to do, now that her usual tactics weren't working. And then she left the kitchen, went back to the living room where everyone else was, and I stood at my sink alone, with my hands in soapy water, and I made a decision. I decided that I was done, being understanding, being patient, being the bigger person, being the doormat that Jessica had been wiping her feet on for 3 years. I was done, and I was going to make sure she understood exactly how done I was. When everyone left that night, Jessica gave me a hug like she always did, and she whispered in my ear, "Think about what I said. Diane, it's for your own good." And I hugged her back, and I whispered, "I will, Jessica, I promise. I'll think about it." And I smiled, and I watched her walk out to Brandon's car, watched her flip her perfect hair, watched her check her reflection in the car window, watched her run her hands through those long blonde waves that she was so proud of, that she posted about constantly on social media, that she spent hundreds of dollars maintaining, that she considered her best feature, her signature, her crowning glory. And that's when the plan started forming in my mind. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from raising 2 sons, it's that the best way to teach someone empathy is to let them experience what they've been inflicting on others. And Jessica was long overdue for a lesson in empathy, in consequences, in what it feels like when someone attacks the thing you're most vulnerable about, the thing you value most about yourself, the thing that makes you feel beautiful and worthy and valuable. I went to bed that night, not sad, not hurt, but energized, purposeful, clear-headed. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I felt absolutely no guilt about it, because Jessica had been systematically destroying me for 3 years, and turnabout was fair play. Karma was coming for her, and I was going to be Karma's helping hand. The next morning, I woke up early, did some research online, looking up information about hair removal products, about what would work quickly and effectively, about what would take someone's hair out completely without causing permanent damage. I wasn't trying to hurt Jessica permanently, wasn't trying to ruin her life forever. I just wanted her to understand, to experience a fraction of what she'd put me through, to know what it felt like to lose your hair, to be vulnerable, to have people look at you differently, to feel less than human because of your appearance. And yes, Maybe I wanted her to feel a little bit of the fear and shame and loss of control that comes with sudden hair loss. Maybe I wanted her to understand viscerally, deeply, painfully, why her comments about my wigs had been so cruel. Why mocking someone for something they can't control is one of the lowest things you can do. I spent hours researching reading reviews, watching videos, learning everything I could about hair removal creams and their effects. And finally, I found what I was looking for: a professional-grade hair removal product that was used in salons for permanent hair removal. It was strong, it was effective, and it was designed to look like regular shampoo with the right bottle. No one would know the difference. The next day, I drove to a beauty supply store on the other side of town, somewhere I'd never been before, where no one would recognize me. I walked in, trying to look casual, trying not to look like someone planning revenge, and I browsed the aisles, looking at products, looking at wigs, looking at hair care items, and finally I made my way to the section with professional hair removal products. There were several options, but I chose one specifically, a cream that came in a large bottle that would take effect within one application, that would remove hair down to the root, that would take weeks to start growing back, and months to look normal again. I picked up the bottle, carried it to the counter, where a black woman about my age, with kind eyes and a warm smile, was working, and when she scanned the product, she looked up at me and said, "This is professional-grade honey. This isn't for home use, you know that, right?" And I looked at her and I made a split-second decision to tell the truth. Well, a version of it, I said, "I know I have a daughter-in-law who's been making cruel comments about my cancer-related hair loss for years, and I want to teach her a lesson about empathy, about what it feels like to lose your hair." The woman's eyes widened, and then she smiled. Not a happy smile, but a knowing one. A smile that said she'd been there. She'd dealt with someone like Jessica too, and she said, "Honey, I had a sister-in-law like that. Once thought she was God's gift to the world because she had good hair. Let me tell you, those types never learn until life humbles them, until they experience the same pain they've been inflicting on others." She leaned in closer and said, "This product here will take everything off. Down to the scalp, takes about one application. If you use enough, takes about a week or two for the hair to start falling out completely. And then it takes months to grow back, and when it first comes in, it comes in patchy, uneven. Not pretty. She'll know exactly what you've been feeling. She'll understand in a way words could never teach her." I bought it paid cash, so there'd be no credit card trail, and I took it home. And I felt absolutely no guilt, because Jessica had spent 3 years trying to break me down, trying to make me feel worthless, trying to destroy my self-esteem, and now she was going to understand exactly what she'd been doing to me, exactly how her words had felt, exactly why what she'd been doing was so cruel. That Sunday, I prepared carefully. I took the hair removal cream and I poured it into an empty bottle, the exact same brand of expensive shampoo that Jessica used, the $60 bottle of luxury shampoo that she kept in my guest bathroom and bragged about constantly. She'd told me once that this shampoo was the secret to her beautiful hair, that she never went anywhere without it, that she'd rather skip a meal than skip washing her hair with this miracle product. It was her thing, her ritual, something she did religiously, and I was going to use that obsession against her. I made sure the bottle looked perfect, made sure there was no way to tell it wasn't real shampoo, made sure the consistency was right, the smell was similar enough that she wouldn't notice anything wrong until it was too late. And then I waited for Sunday dinner, waited for Jessica to arrive, waited for my moment of revenge, and I felt calm. Calmer than I'd felt in months, because I was finally taking control, finally fighting back, finally refusing to be a victim anymore. Jessica arrived that Sunday, right on time as always, and true to form, she immediately headed to my guest bathroom to freshen up. She always did this, always spent 15 or 20 minutes in there fixing her hair, touching up her makeup, taking selfies for Instagram. She was predictable in her vanity, and that predictability was going to be her downfall. I waited, heard the bathroom door close, heard the water running, and then I very quietly walked past the bathroom door and I listened. I could hear her humming, could hear the shower running, could hear her washing her hair, and I knew she was using that shampoo, that expensive luxury shampoo that was actually hair removal cream. And I smiled. I smiled because karma was finally catching up with Jessica, because she was finally going to understand what it felt like to lose the thing she valued most about herself, because I'd finally found a way to make her stop making her hurt the way she'd been hurting me. Dinner that night was perfectly normal. Jessica came out of the bathroom with her hair freshly washed and styled, looking perfect as always, and she made her usual comments about my cooking, about my house, about my outfit, and I took it all with a smile because I knew what was coming. I knew that in a few days her perfect hair would start falling out, would start coming out in clumps. In the shower, would start leaving bald patches on her perfect head, and she'd finally understand what I'd been going through. She'd understand the fear, the shame, the grief, the loss of identity that comes with losing your hair, and maybe she'd become a better person because of it, or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she'd just be angry and vindictive and looking for revenge herself. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. I'd spent 3 years caring about her feelings, caring about keeping the peace, caring about being the bigger person, and where had it gotten? Me nowhere. It had gotten me nowhere except more abused, more diminished, more destroyed. So I was done caring. I was done being nice. I was done protecting someone who'd shown me nothing but cruelty, and if that made me a bad person, if that made me vindictive, if that made me just as bad as her, then so be it. At least I'd finally stood up for myself. At least I'd finally fought back. At least I'd finally shown Jessica that there were consequences for treating people the way she'd been treating. 3 days later, my phone rang early in the morning. It was Brandon, and his voice was panicked. "Mom," he said, "you need to come to the hospital right now. It's Jessica. Something's wrong with her." My heart started pounding, even though I knew exactly what was wrong. Even though this was the result I'd been planning for. "What happened?" I asked, trying to sound concerned. "Is she okay? Her hair?" "Mom," Brandon said, and his voice was shaking. "It's falling out in clumps. She woke up this morning, and her pillow was covered in hair, and when she went to shower, more came out, handfuls of it. Mom, she's hysterical. We're at the ER now. They're running tests trying to figure out what's causing it." I made appropriate concerned noises, told Brandon I'd be there as soon as I could, and I hung up the phone, and I sat there in my kitchen, and I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction. Yes, definitely satisfaction that my plan had worked, that Jessica was finally experiencing what I'd experienced, but also a little bit of fear, because this was real. Now, this wasn't just a fantasy or a plan. This was actual consequences for actual actions, and I had to face them, had to see them through, had to deal with whatever came next. I got dressed, drove to the hospital, and found Brandon in the waiting room. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his clothes were rumpled, and when he saw me, he practically collapsed into my arms. "Mom, I don't know what's happening," he said. "The doctors don't know what's causing it. They're running every test they can think of. But Jessica's hair just keeps falling out. She won't let anyone see her. She locked herself in the bathroom and she won't come out. She keeps saying her hair is everything, that without it, she's nothing, that her life is over." I held my son, let him cry on my shoulder, and I felt a pang of guilt. Not for what I'd done to Jessica, but for what it was putting Brandon through, because he didn't deserve this. He was caught in the middle of something he didn't understand, something that wasn't his fault. Even if his inaction over the years had contributed to it, I spent the next few hours at the hospital sitting with Brandon, waiting for test results that would, of course, show nothing. Because there was nothing to find. Jessica's hair loss wasn't caused by disease or stress or vitamin deficiency. It was caused by me, by the hair removal cream I'd put in her shampoo bottle, by my deliberate, calculated act of revenge. Finally, a doctor came out and told us they couldn't find any medical reason for the hair loss, that sometimes these things just happened, that it could be an allergic reaction to a product, or stress, or any number of things, and that the best thing to do was just wait and see if it grew back. Brandon asked if he could see Jessica, and the doctor said she'd been asking for her mother, not for Brandon, but for her mother. So I waited, and eventually Jessica's mother arrived, this perfectly coiffed, perfectly dressed woman in her 50s who looked at me like I was dirt, like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe, and she went into the room where Jessica was being held, and I could hear crying through the door, could hear Jessica sobbing about her hair, about her appearance, about how her life was over, and her mother comforting her, telling her it would be okay, that they'd figure it out, that there were solutions, wigs, hair pieces, extensions, and I thought, welcome to my world. Jessica, welcome to the reality I've been living for 5 years. Welcome to looking in the mirror and not recognizing yourself. Welcome to the grief of losing a part of your identity. Welcome to the fear that people will judge you, will see you differently, will value you less, because of how you look. This is what I've been trying to tell you. This is what you've been mocking me for. This is empathy. Over the next 2 weeks, Jessica's condition deteriorated, not medically, but psychologically. Her hair continued to fall out in clumps, leaving her with patchy bald spots all over her scalp, and she absolutely could not handle it. She stopped going to work, told Brandon she was too sick, stopped seeing friends, stopped going out in public at all. She basically locked herself in their house and refused to leave. Refused to let anyone see her like this. Brandon called me every day with updates, and every day he sounded more worried, more scared, more desperate. His perfect wife, the confident, beautiful woman he'd married, had become someone he didn't recognize, someone who couldn't function, couldn't cope, couldn't face the world without her hair. And honestly, I felt bad for Brandon. I did, because none of this was his fault. He was just collateral damage in the war between his wife and his mother, but I didn't feel bad for Jessica, not even a little bit, because this was exactly what she deserved. This was karma. This was consequences. This was justice for 3 years of systematic emotional abuse, a week after Jessica's hair started falling out. I did something that I knew would either make things better or make things infinitely worse. I sent her a care package. I packed up a box with some of my nicest wigs, the ones that looked most natural, the ones I'd spent the most money on. And I included a note that said, "Jessica, I know how hard this is. I've been where you are. I understand the fear and the grief and the shame. If you need someone to talk to, someone who's been through this, I'm here. I never expected a response, never thought Jessica would actually reach out. But I wanted her to know that despite everything, despite her cruelty, I was still willing to help if she wanted it, because that's who I am. I'm not cruel by nature. I don't enjoy seeing people suffer. I just needed Jessica to learn a lesson, needed her to understand what she'd been putting me through. And now that she understood, now that she was living it, I was willing to extend. An olive branch was willing to be the bigger person again, if she was ready to change. Jessica didn't call, didn't text, didn't acknowledge the package at all, and I wasn't surprised, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that I'd been right, that losing your hair really is devastating, that her comments about my wigs had been cruel, that she owed me an apology, and Jessica wasn't ready for that. Yet wasn't ready to admit she'd been wrong, wasn't ready to be vulnerable or humble or anything other than the perfect, beautiful woman she'd always been. But that was okay. I could wait. I could be patient, because I knew eventually she'd have no choice. Eventually, she'd have to face reality, just like I'd had to face it 5 years ago when the chemo took my hair 2 weeks after the hair loss started. Brandon came to my house alone without Jessica. He looked exhausted, like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks, and we sat in my living room, the same living room where we'd had so many conversations over the years, and he said, "Mom, I don't know what to do. Jessica's completely shut down. She won't eat, won't shower, barely sleeps. She just sits in our bedroom with all the lights off, crying, looking at old photos of herself, saying her life is over, that she's hideous, that no one will ever look at her the same way. And I don't know how to help her. I don't know what to say to make it better." I looked at my son, This man, I'd raised this person, I'd loved more than anything. And I said, Brandon, has Jessica always based her entire self-worth on her appearance? Has she always measured her value entirely by how she looks? He looked uncomfortable, shifted in his seat and said, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, that's what first attracted me to her. She's beautiful, and she's always been really conscious of how she looks, really particular about her appearance, but I thought that was just her being confident, being put together. I didn't realize it went this deep. I didn't realize she'd completely fall apart without her hair. And there, it was the truth that he'd been avoiding for years. He'd married someone whose entire identity was wrapped up in being beautiful, in being perfect, in being the most attractive woman in the room. And when that was taken away, when she lost her looks, or at least thought she had nothing else. No inner strength, no sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to appearance, no ability to cope with adversity. And that was sad. It really was. But it was also exactly the lesson she'd needed to learn. I chose my next words very carefully because I knew this was a pivotal moment, knew this was a chance to either heal the rift between us or make it worse. Brandon, I said, do you remember when I was going through chemo, when I lost my hair? He nodded, tears filling his eyes. Of course, Mom, I remember you. Were so strong, so brave. You never complained, never let it get you down. You just kept going. I wasn't strong. Brandon, I said, I was terrified. I cried every single night. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the person looking back. I felt like the cancer had stolen my identity, my femininity, everything that made me feel like myself. And I grieved that loss. I grieved it deeply, but I still got up every morning. I still put on a wig or a scarf. I still faced the world because I had to. Because I had you and Marcus depending on me. Because I refused to let the cancer win. And you know what helped me get through it? What gave me strength? His voice was barely a whisper. What having a support system, having people who loved me for who I was, not what I looked like, having friends and family who told me I was still beautiful, still worthy, still valuable, still me. That's what got me through, Brandon. Not my hair, not my appearance, but the love and support of the people around me. And that's what Jessica needs right now. She needs to learn that her value isn't in her hair or her face or her body. She needs to learn that she's worth more than her appearance. She needs to learn what real strength is. Brandon was crying now. Really crying, and he said, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I'm sorry I didn't defend you when Jessica was being cruel. I'm sorry I let her treat you the way she did. I knew it was wrong. I knew she was hurting you, but I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't want to cause problems in my marriage. I didn't want to lose her. And I thought you could handle it. I thought you were strong enough to just take it, but I was wrong. I was so wrong. And now, look what's happened. Now Jessica's falling apart, and I don't know how to help her, and I feel like this is all my fault. Somehow, I reached over and took his hand, squeezed it tight. Brandon, this isn't your fault. What's happening to Jessica isn't your fault, but you do need to understand something. About your wife, she spent 3 years being cruel to me, mocking my appearance, attacking my insecurities, making me feel worthless in my own home, and you let her. You sat there at my table week after week and watched her tear me down, and you said, nothing, and that hurt, Brandon. That hurt almost as much as what she was saying. Because you're my son. You're supposed to protect me. You're supposed to stand up for me, and you chose her comfort over my dignity every single time. He pulled his hand away, looked at me with this mix of shame and confusion, and he said, I know, Mom. I know. And I'll never forgive myself for that. But what do I do now? How do I help Jessica? How do we get through this? And that's when I made a decision. I could tell him. The truth, could admit what I'd done, could confess that I was the reason Jessica's hair had fallen out, or I could let him keep believing it was some mysterious medical condition, could let Jessica suffer through this without ever knowing it was deliberate revenge. And in that moment, looking at my son's tear-stained face, seeing how much he was hurting, I almost told him, almost confessed everything. But then I thought about 3 years of abuse, 3 years of cruel comments, 3 years of being made to feel less than human in my own home, and I thought, no, she hasn't suffered enough yet. She hasn't learned the lesson she needs to learn. She hasn't truly understood what she put me through. So I looked at Brandon and I said, you help her by being there, by supporting her, by showing her that her value isn't in her hair. You help her by being patient, by being kind, by reminding her every day that she's still the same person she was before this happened. And Brandon, maybe this is an opportunity for Jessica to grow, to develop some empathy, to understand what other people go through when they lose their hair, to become a better, more compassionate person. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the most important. Growth Brandon left that afternoon still confused, still scared, but with at least some direction. Some idea of how to help. His wife and I sat in my house alone, and I felt that same complex mix of emotions, satisfaction that my plan had worked, guilt, that I'd hurt my son even if it was collateral damage, and a strange sort of anticipation because I knew this wasn't over, knew that eventually the truth would come out, and I needed to be prepared for that. Over the next month, Jessica's hair continued to fall out until she was completely bald, just like I had been after chemo, just like I still was underneath my wigs. She was devastated, absolutely destroyed by the loss. She'd stopped working, had basically become a recluse, refused to see anyone, refused to go anywhere, and according to Brandon, she spent most of her time crying, looking at old photos of herself, mourning the person she used to be. And I watched all of this from a distance, heard about it through Brandon's phone calls, and I felt vindicated, felt like justice was finally being served, felt like Jessica was finally understanding what she'd put me through. But I also started to feel something else, something I hadn't expected. I started to feel pity, not for what had happened to her because she'd deserved that, but for how completely it had destroyed her, for how fragile her sense of self had been, for how little she had to hold on to when her looks were gone. And I realized that as cruel as Jessica had been to me, she was also deeply damaged, deeply insecure, deeply afraid of exactly what had happened to her. And that didn't excuse her behavior, didn't make what she'd done to me, okay? But it did make her more human, more understandable, more pitiable. About 6 weeks after Jessica's hair loss started, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jessica standing on my porch, and I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't wearing any makeup. Her face was bare and raw and vulnerable. She had a baseball cap, pulled low over her head, but I could see the edges of her baldness peeking out. She looked smaller, somehow diminished, like losing her hair had physically shrunk her, and her eyes, those eyes that had always been so confident, so cold, so judgmental, were red and swollen from crying. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, and I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in my living room, the same living room where she'd spent 3 years judging everything about me. And for a long time, neither of us said anything. We just sat there in this heavy-loaded silence. Finally, Jessica spoke. "I know you did it," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "I know you switched my shampoo. I went through everything trying to figure out what could have caused. This went through all my products, all my cosmetics, everything. And the only thing that makes sense is that someone tampered with my shampoo. And the only person who had access to it in the days before my hair started falling out was you." My heart started pounding, but I kept my face neutral, kept my voice calm, and I said, "What are you talking about, Jessica? I didn't tamper with anything. Please," she said. And now there was emotion in her voice, anger and hurt, and something that sounded almost like respect. "Please don't insult me by lying. I know what you did. I know you put something in my shampoo, something that made my hair fall out, and honestly, I can't even be that angry about it because I deserved it. Didn't. I deserved this." Looked at this woman who'd made my life hell for 3 years. This woman who was now sitting in my living room, bald and broken, and asking me to acknowledge what I'd done, and I made another choice. I could keep denying, could maintain my innocence, could force her to prove something she couldn't prove, or I could own. It could admit what I'd done, could face the consequences of my actions. And in that moment, I chose truth. Yes, I said I did it. I switched your shampoo with hair removal cream that Sunday after you called me bald and pathetic, after 3 years of your constant cruelty, after 3 years of your making me feel worthless, I gave you a taste of your own medicine. I made you understand what it feels like to lose your hair, to be vulnerable, to have your appearance suddenly changed against your will, to feel less than human because of how you look. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away, didn't break eye contact. Why, she asked, why would you do something so cruel? Why would you deliberately hurt me like this? And I felt anger rise up in my chest, hot and righteous. Because how dare she ask me why? How dare she act like she was the victim here because you hurt me first? I said, my voice rising, because you spent 3 years systematically destroying my self-esteem, because you mocked me for something I had no control over, because you attacked the one thing I was most vulnerable about, and you did it with a smile on your face. You enjoyed it, Jessica. You enjoyed making me feel small and worthless and pathetic, and I was done. I was done being your punching bag, done letting you treat me like garbage, done pretending your cruelty was okay, because you're my son's wife. So yes, I did it. Yes, I took your hair the way cancer took mine. Yes, I made you vulnerable the way you made me vulnerable, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because you needed to learn this lesson. You needed to understand that your actions have consequences, that you can't just go through life being cruel to people and expect no repercussions. Jessica was crying now, really crying, tears streaming down her face, dripping off her chin. And she said, "You're right. I was cruel to you. I was so cruel, and I didn't even fully realize how cruel until this happened, until I lost my hair and suddenly understood what you went through, what you still go through every day. And Diane, I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry for everything I said, for everything I did, for 3 years of making you feel less than human." I let her cry for a while, let her sit with her remorse, her guilt, her newfound understanding. Then I said, "Jessica, why were you so cruel to me? What did I ever do to deserve that treatment?" She wiped her eyes, took a shaky breath, and said, "You didn't do anything. It was never about you. It was always about me, about my own fears, my own insecurities. I'm terrified of getting older, terrified of losing my looks, terrified of becoming invisible, the way older women become invisible in our society, and you represented everything I was afraid of. You were older. You'd been through something traumatic that changed your appearance. You'd lost your hair. You weren't conventionally attractive anymore by society's standards. And instead of having compassion for you, instead of seeing your strength and resilience, I saw you as a warning, as a cautionary tale, as everything I didn't want to become. So I was cruel to you. I put you down to make myself feel better, to convince myself that I would never be like you, that I would always stay young and beautiful and relevant, that what happened to you could never happen to me. And now, look at me. Now, I'm the bald one. Now, I'm the one who's lost the thing I valued most about myself. Now, I understand exactly what I put you through, and it's the worst thing I've ever experienced. Diane, I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't function. I look in the mirror and I don't recognize myself. I feel like I've lost my identity, like without my hair, I'm nothing. And I hate feeling this way, but I can't help it, because my whole life, my whole sense of self-worth has been tied up in being beautiful. And now that's gone. And I don't know who I am anymore." We talked for hours that afternoon, really talked for the first time in the 3 years Jessica had been part of our family. She told me about her childhood, about growing up with a mother who was obsessed with appearance, who taught her that beauty was the only thing that mattered, who measured her worth entirely by how she looked. She told me about the pressure to be perfect, to maintain her appearance, to never age, to never gain weight, to never have a bad hair day. She told me about the constant anxiety, about looking in the mirror 50 times a day, checking for flaws, checking to make sure she still looked perfect, checking to make sure she was still beautiful, still valuable, still worthy. And I told her about my cancer, about the terror of diagnosis, about the brutality of treatment, about watching my hair fall out in clumps in the shower, about the day I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger looking back, about the grief that comes with losing a part of your identity, about learning to find. Worth beyond appearance, about the wigs that helped me feel human again, about the years of rebuilding my self-esteem, about the strength it took to keep going. And slowly, very slowly, we found common ground, found understanding, found the beginning of something that might eventually become empathy or even forgiveness. "Will my hair grow back?" Jessica asked finally, and I could hear the fear in her voice, the same fear I'd felt 5 years ago when I'd asked my oncologist the same question. "Yes," I said, "it'll take time, several months probably, but it will grow back. The hair removal cream I used isn't permanent, it just removes hair down to the root, but the follicles are still there, still viable. It'll start growing back in a few weeks probably. Patchy at first, uneven, but it will come back, and in the meantime, I have wigs, I have scarves, I have 5 years of experience navigating life without hair. And I'm willing to help you if you want my help, if you're ready to let me help you." She started, crying again, and this time I reached over and took her hand, and we sat there together. 2 women who'd both lost their hair, who'd both felt the vulnerability and fear and grief that comes with that, who'd both learned hard lessons about empathy and cruelty and the consequences of our actions. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being willing to help me after everything I've done to you, after how terrible I've been. I don't deserve your help, but I'm grateful for it. So grateful." And I said, "Everyone deserves help. Jessica, everyone deserves compassion and support when they're going through something difficult, even people who've been cruel, even people who've hurt others, because holding on to anger, holding on to the desire for revenge, it only hurts us in the end. It only makes us bitter and small, and I don't want to be bitter and small. I want to be someone who can forgive, who can help, who can turn something negative into something positive, and that starts with helping you." Over the next few weeks, Jessica and I met regularly. I brought her wigs, showed her how to put them on, how to style them, how to secure them so they looked natural, how to make them feel like part of herself instead of a costume. I took her to the beauty supply store, the same one where I'd bought the hair removal cream, and introduced her to the woman who'd sold it to me. And that woman looked at Jessica, looked at her baseball cap and the edges of baldness peeking out, and she looked at me, and she smiled, and she said, "So this is the daughter-in-law who needed to learn about empathy." And Jessica's eyes widened, and she looked at me, and I nodded and said, "Yes, this is her, and she's learning, she's growing, she's becoming better." And the woman nodded and said, Good, because we all need humbling. Sometimes we all need to be brought low so we can learn to be better people." And she spent the next hour showing Jessica different wigs, different styles, teaching her how to care for them, how to make them last, how to feel beautiful, even without her natural hair. And I watched Jessica listen, really listen to this woman's advice, and I saw something shift in her, saw her start to understand that losing your hair doesn't make you less than, doesn't make you worthless, doesn't make you unlovable. It just makes you human, makes you vulnerable, makes you someone who needs compassion and support and understanding, just like everyone else. Jessica also started therapy, started working on her deeper issues, the ones that had made her so cruel in the first place, her fear of aging, her obsession with appearance, her need for external validation, her tendency to tear others down to build herself up, and slowly, painfully, she started to change, started to develop empathy, started to see other people as fully human, instead of just as threats or competitors or warnings of what she might become. She apologized to me formally, sincerely, multiple times, took full responsibility. For 3 years of emotional abuse, acknowledged the pain she'd caused, admitted that her behavior had been inexcusable, and asked if there was any way we could start over, if we could build a real relationship based on mutual respect and genuine caring, and I said yes, because what else could I say? Holding on to anger, refusing to forgive, would only hurt me, would only keep me trapped in the cycle of pain that Jessica had created. And I was tired of being trapped, tired of letting her actions control my emotional state, tired of giving her power over my peace of mind. So I chose forgiveness, not because Jessica deserved it. She didn't. But because I deserved peace, I deserved to move forward, I deserved to let go of the burden of anger and resentment I'd been carrying, and the only way to do that was to forgive Brandon. Eventually came around, eventually understood why I'd done what I did, eventually apologized for not defending me sooner, for letting Jessica's abuse continue unchecked, for choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. He told me he'd been blind, had been willfully ignorant, had seen what was happening, but convinced himself it wasn't that bad, that I could handle it, that Jessica didn't mean anything by it. But now he understood. Now he saw clearly. Now he realized that silence in the face of cruelty is complicity. And he was complicit in what Jessica had done to me. And he vowed to never let it happen again, to always stand up for me, to always defend me, no matter what the cost to his marriage might be. And hearing that, hearing my son finally choose me, meant everything, meant more than the revenge, had meant more than Jessica's suffering, had meant more than anything, because it meant I mattered. It meant I was worth defending. It meant my dignity and self-respect were worth fighting for. Jessica and Brandon also went to couples counseling, worked on their marriage, worked on communication, worked on the dynamic that had allowed Jessica to be so cruel for so long, worked on Brandon, learning to set boundaries, to stand up to his wife, to be a partner instead of a passive observer, and slowly, over many months, their marriage started to heal, started to become something healthier, something more equal, something based on mutual respect, instead of Brandon just trying to keep Jessica happy at everyone else's expense. 6 months after Jessica's hair started falling out, we had our first Sunday dinner together since everything had happened. I'd told Jessica and Brandon I needed time, needed space, and they'd respected that, had given me the distance I needed to process everything that had happened. But now I was ready to try again, ready to see if we could salvage some kind of family relationship. So they came over Jessica, wearing one of the wigs I'd given her, a shoulder-length brown bob that actually looked quite nice on her. And we sat down at my table, the same table where she'd spent years mocking me. And we ate and we talked. And it was awkward. Yes, it was tense, but it was also honest. It was real. It was two people trying to move forward, trying to build something better from the ruins of what had been. And at the end of the night, Jessica hugged me and she whispered, "Thank you for the wig. Thank you for teaching me empathy. Even if it was the hardest lesson I've ever learned. Thank you for being willing to forgive me. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." And I hugged her back and I said, "We all deserve forgiveness. Jessica, we all deserve second chances. We all deserve the opportunity to become better than we were. And you're becoming better. I can see it. I can feel it. And I'm proud of you for doing the work, for facing your demons, for changing. Now 2 years later, things are different. So much different. Jessica's hair grew back just like I said it would. It came in darker than before, a little thicker, a little curlier, different from what it had been, but still beautiful. And she wears it natural now. Doesn't spend hours styling it. Doesn't obsess over every strand. Doesn't post constant selfies showing it off. She's learned that her worth isn't in her hair, isn't in her appearance, is in who she is as a person, in how she treats others, in the kindness and compassion she shows to people who are struggling. Our relationship is better than it's ever been. Is it perfect? No. Do we still have moments of tension? Moments where old patterns threaten to resurface? Yes. But we work through them. We communicate. We address problems when they come up, instead of letting them fester. And most importantly, there's genuine affection. Now, genuine respect. We actually like each other. Actually enjoy spending time together. Actually have real conversations about real things. She's become the daughter I always wanted, the friend I didn't know I needed, and our Sunday dinners are once again something I look forward to, instead of something I dread. Jessica also volunteers now at a cancer support center helping women who are going through chemotherapy, helping them navigate hair loss, helping them find wigs, helping them understand they're still beautiful, still worthy, still valuable. She uses her experience, uses what she went through, uses the empathy she gained to help others, and watching her do that. Watching her turn her pain into purpose makes everything I did feel worth it, makes the revenge feel justified, makes the cruelty I inflicted feel like it served a greater good, because Jessica became a better person because of what happened. She developed empathy, she learned compassion, she understood on a visceral level what it means to lose your hair, to be vulnerable, to need support. And she's using that understanding to help others, and that's more than I ever could have hoped for. Brandon and I are closer now than we've been in years. He calls me regularly, not just out of obligation, but because he wants to talk to me, wants my advice, wants my perspective. He stands up for me now, defends me, doesn't let anyone, including Jessica, treat me with disrespect, and he's told me multiple times how sorry he is for the years he spent being silent, for the years he let Jessica hurt me without consequence. He's working on being a better son, and I'm watching him become the man I always knew he could be. Marcus and Tanya know the whole story. I told them everything. Told them what Jessica had done, told them what I'd done in revenge. And Marcus surprised me by saying, "Mom, I'm proud of you. I know that sounds weird, but I am. I'm proud. That you finally stood up for yourself. That you finally fought back." Tanya had been more hesitant, had worried about the ethics of what I'd done, had questioned whether revenge was ever justified, but even she eventually came around, eventually admitted that sometimes people need dramatic lessons to change. Need to experience consequences to understand their actions, need to hit rock bottom before they can start climbing back up. And Jessica had definitely hit rock bottom, had definitely experienced consequences, had definitely learned her lesson. And she was better for it. We all were better for it, because the situation, as painful as it had been, had forced us all to examine ourselves, to look at our own behavior, to ask hard questions about who we were and who we wanted to be. I had to ask myself, am I someone who can forgive? Can I let go of anger? Can I move forward, or will I stay trapped in the past? Trapped in bitterness, trapped in the identity of victim. Jessica had to ask herself, am I someone who can change? Can I develop empathy? Can I become more than my appearance? Or will I stay shallow, stay cruel, stay someone who tears others down to build herself up? And Brandon had to ask himself, am I someone who can stand up for what's right? Can I defend the people I love? Can I set boundaries? Or will I always take the path of least resistance, always choose comfort over courage, always let bad behavior slide because confronting it is too hard? And we all answered those questions, chose growth, chose change, chose to become better versions of ourselves. And that's what this whole experience taught me, that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the most important growth. That crisis can be opportunity, that breaking down is sometimes necessary before you can build back up stronger. My message to anyone watching this who's dealing with a cruel family member, who's being systematically destroyed by someone's words, who's wondering if they should fight back or continue to be the bigger person, is this: first, protect yourself. Always, always protect yourself. Your mental health, your emotional well-being, your sense of self-worth are not sacrifices you need to make to keep family peace. Being kind to cruel people doesn't make you noble, it makes you a target. And while you should always try communication, first, try setting boundaries. Try having honest conversations about how someone's behavior is affecting you. If those things don't work, if the person continues to be cruel, continues to tear you down, continues to make you feel worthless, then you have to make a choice. Do you continue to take it? Do you continue to absorb the abuse? Do you continue to sacrifice your own well-being for the sake of family harmony? Or do you fight back? Do you set consequences? Do you show that person that their behavior won't be tolerated, that there are real repercussions for treating you badly now? I'm not necessarily advocating that you do what I did. I'm not saying you should seek revenge in the dramatic way I did, because what I did was extreme, was potentially illegal, was definitely risky, but I am saying that you need to stand up for yourself, need to refuse to be a victim, need to show people that you have value, that you deserve respect, that you won't tolerate being treated as less than human, and if that means cutting someone out of your life, if that means setting firm boundaries, if that means having difficult conversations, if that means, yes, even fighting back in some way, then do it. Do whatever you need to do to protect your peace, to maintain your dignity, to preserve your sense of self-worth. Because you matter. You are valuable, you are worthy of respect and kindness, and anyone who treats you otherwise doesn't deserve access to your life, doesn't deserve your time and energy, doesn't deserve the privilege of your presence. Looking back now, 2 years after I switched Jessica's shampoo with hair removal cream, I don't regret it. Not for a second. Yes, it was extreme. Yes, it was cruel. Yes, it was probably wrong by conventional moral standards, but it was also necessary. It was the only thing that would have gotten through to Jessica. The only thing that would have made her understand. The only thing that would have forced her to change. Because I'd tried everything else. I'd tried being patient. I'd tried being understanding. I'd tried setting boundaries. I'd tried having conversations. I'd tried enlisting Brandon's help, and none of it had worked. Nothing had stopped Jessica's cruelty. Nothing had made her see me as fully human, as deserving of respect, as someone who'd been through real trauma and deserved compassion, not mockery. So I did the one thing I hadn't tried. I hit her where it hurt. I took from her what she'd taken from me. I made her feel what I'd felt. And it worked. It changed her. It changed our family. It changed me. And while I wouldn't recommend my methods to others, while I acknowledge that what I did was ethically questionable, at best I also know that sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. Sometimes nice doesn't work. Sometimes being the bigger person just makes you a bigger target. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to show them what it feels like. To be bullied, to give them a taste of their own medicine, to teach them empathy through experience rather than words. And that's what I did. I taught Jessica empathy. I showed her what it felt like to lose your hair, to be vulnerable, to be judged, for your appearance to feel less than human because of how you look. And she learned. She learned deeply. She learned painfully. She learned in a way that changed her fundamentally. And for that, for the person she became after the experience, for the growth that came from the pain, I have no regrets. My daughter-in-law called me bald and pathetic, mocked me for wearing wigs, made fun of my cancer-related hair loss for 3 years. So I replaced her expensive shampoo with hair removal cream, and she lost every strand of that perfect hair she was so proud of. And you know what? She learned what empathy means. She learned what consequences feel like. She learned that you can't go through life being cruel to people without eventually facing repercussions. And she became a better person. Because of it, became kinder, became more compassionate, became someone who uses her own pain to help others, instead of someone who inflicts pain on others to feel better about herself. So, yes, I got my revenge. Yes, I hurt her. Yes, I made her suffer, but I also taught her, I changed her. I helped her become someone worth knowing, someone worth loving, someone who makes the world a little bit better instead of a little bit worse. And if that makes me a bad person, if that makes me vindictive, if that makes me cruel, then so be it. Because at least I finally stood up for myself. At least I finally fought back. At least I finally showed Jessica and showed myself that I have value, that I deserve respect, that I won't be anyone's punching bag ever again. And that's a lesson that was worth every consequence, every risk, every moment of guilt, because I'm free now. Free from the weight of Jessica's cruelty, free from the burden of absorbing abuse to keep the peace, free from the prison of trying to make everyone else comfortable while I suffered in silence. I'm free, and that freedom is worth everything. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story on the screen. You can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.